No, primero, sí.
No lo tengo.
¿No? ¿Dónde quedó Javier?
Ok, ¿en este? Muy bien. Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Mexico City. Welcome to the UNAM. Welcome to the Facultad de Ciencias. Welcome to the meeting, which is called the Latin American Symposium on Nuclear Physics and Applications, version 2024. The symposium goes back all the way to last century, 1995, when Laszlo Bogus organized the first meeting in Caracas in Venezuela. The second one was also held in Venezuela. And the third one moved to another country. It was in Colombia. And for the fourth one, we had the honor in Mexico to organize the meeting. It was held in the Colegio Nacional in downtown Mexico City. And that was in the year 2001. After that, it was organized almost every 2 years. It moved from between many different countries in Latin America. The last edition was held in Costa Rica a couple of months before the outbreak of the COVID crisis. So the sequence of every 2 years was interrupted, but we're happy now to have the meeting in Mexico City. This time it is the 14th occasion that this meeting is held. This series of symposium have been very important in unifying the nuclear physics communities in Latin America, establishing new collaborations and coordinating our efforts in this field. As a result of this, we organized also, there is a Latin American organization called LASNPA, which is Asociación Latinoamericana de Física Nuclear y Aplicaciones. And that was formed in the year 2009 in Chile, in Santiago de Chile. So the first 15 years, this organization was run by a steering committee, which was headed by Alinka Lipin and Andres Kreiner. So during this symposium, we will formally establish the organization ALAFNA, a governing board, etc., etc. So there will be a joint meeting of the steering committee and the new members of ALAFNA. This meeting will be held tomorrow afternoon at 5 o'clock. So at 5 o'clock we finish the talks, and the members of these committees will stay for this event. Last but not least, I would also like to thank several institutions for their support in the organization of this meeting. First, there is the Sociedad Mexicana de Física, the Mexican Physical Society, who help us with the registration and many other things. There's also the International Atomic Agency, the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, which gave some fellowships. There's the help from the Office of the Dean of Sciences of UNAM. We received help from the Instituto Física, which are here represented by María, Ester, Brandan, and Libertad Barón. Also from the Instituto de Ciencias Nucleares from UNAM, represented here by its director, Pilar Castro. And finally, also, obviamente, by the Facultad de Ciencias, Víctor Velázquez, the director of the Facultad de Ciencias, was going to be here, but he had an important meeting and he could not come. So, in closing, I think we have put together an excellent program, covers a large variety of frontline research in the field of nuclear physics applications. So I wish everybody a wonderful week in Mexico City. And thank you very much for coming. Pues pasamos el micrófono a Pilar Carreón
No,
Castro.
dame un minuto.
Okay,
Un minuto. Professor Roelof Bijker, the chair of this LASNPA Symposium, has already given you his warm welcome, and I do the same. I've had the honor of being the co-chair, working with him for more than a year for this meeting. That means so much for the nuclear physics community in Latin America. I want then to ask Doctora Pilar Carreón, the director of the Nuclear Science Institute, one of the sponsoring institutions, to say a few words in the line of the formal inauguration.
Good morning. Thank you so much for this invitation. And I am great pleasure for me and for Nuclear Science Institute and for the UNAM try to do this important meeting. I think this is very important occasion to start or continue the collaboration. I am very, very enthusiastic, especially for the students. I think this is very important for the students to try to start this meeting and try to start this special nuclear science. And I think this is a very, very good opportunity for us for try to continue this important meeting. Thank you for Roelof Bijker and Libertad Barrón and María Ester Brandan, Javier Mas, and Javier Mas, and yeah. Paulina Amador Valenzuela from ININ, and Victor Velázquez for this is the host of this important meeting. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Me paso al español para darles también la bienvenida en nuestro idioma. Es muy importante para la universidad llevar a cabo este tipo de eventos. Muchas gracias por estar aquí. Para los estudiantes, espero que sea una gran oportunidad para que inicien y para que continúen justamente desarrollando estas habilidades y esta oportunidad de trabajar con pares para poder llevar a cabo sus actividades de manera profesional. Thank you for trying to continue this important meeting. Thank you, Roelof, María Ester, Libertad, and now I think it's 10 to 10. I think it's important, to continue with this important meeting. And I don't know, it's also okay for the inauguration for this important meeting. Thank you, and I hope that this is special activities for all. I think this is very important for everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Once finished this first formal activity, this is yours. Thank you much. We'll start with the scientific program, and we will initiate the first of 2 morning sessions. And our first speaker, give me a minute to get my notebook on. I want to introduce, even if he probably needs no great introductions because we all know him, Professor Alejandro Frank. He's an emeritus academic researcher in the Institute of Nuclear Sciences here at UNAM. His life shows many achievements in science, teaching, university teaching, but also social projects to improve by education the life of the least favored members of our society. As a physicist, he has worked in the fields of nuclear and molecular physics and he's a recognized expert in nuclear supersymmetries. Among many well-deserved awards, he received the National Award on Arts and Sciences in 2004, and since 2016, he's a member of Colegio Nacional, one of the most important recognitions for Mexican humanists, artists, and scientists. Alejandro.
Morning. Thank you, Arturo. And thank you very much for the invitation, and María Ester for your very generous presentation. And today it might be a surprise for some of you, but I won't be talking about nuclear physics. I've been working in nuclear physics for most of my life, in particular using symmetry methods. And here in front of me is my long-time collaboration, Piet van Isacker, with whom I have written a few papers and a couple of books. And for me, symmetry has been, group theory has been my main mathematical technique to work in different problems associated to physics. And of course, all of you know, I don't have to stop here, that symmetry has to do, has become one of our main mathematical languages to work both in classical physics as in quantum mechanics, field theory, and even general relativity. In nuclear physics in particular, also in a number of different contexts, we have applied, many of us have applied symmetry methods to uncover the patterns that appear in nuclear systems. So I won't stop here. You guys all know very well about this. But the problem is, can we extend this, this kind of approach to other systems, to biology in particular? That's the greatest problem still open to us. What is life? How did life developed in history, and so on? And I will particularly try to show you about scale invariant symmetry and how it has something to say about biology perhaps in a deeper sense that you might think. And of course, in terms of form, we see similarity in nature. We see similar structures, fractal structures in nature. In particular, in terms of our body and our organs, fractality has been chosen by evolution to somehow optimize its functioning. My favorite case is the lungs. The lungs have a fractal structure. And in fact, this is quite surprising when one hears about it, but the area that adult lungs have to interchange of gases can be as large as a football field, precisely because of this fractal structure. So I will try to show you that there's another very interesting fact coming from physics, which is associated to symmetry and which has something to say about function in biological system. And this is the area of phase transitions and critical points. I won't stop here either, just to say that at different phases, there's essentially a single scale that define the behavior of the systems. In the case of a crystal, of ice, this is quite obvious, but also in water, the density, and in vapor contained in a box, it's also basically the pressure, the temperature, and so on. However, at the critical temperatures, something special happens, and there's a critical point where all scales begin to mix, both in this critical point as well as in this critical point, as a function of temperature. This is well known by all of us, but what is less well known is what happens dynamically. How these transitions behave in time. And this is essentially what I'm going to talk about. And this was initiated in some way by Kaufman. And it has been said and proposed that biological systems might lie near critical points. And I will try to explain that. And this includes a number of different systems. I will talk about some of them. So why do biological organisms are at critical points has to do with the fact that it creates macroscopic behavior and coherence in the system. And this is what I'm going to try to show you in what follows. To do that, I will use the well-known Ising model. It's not the Ising model. It was explained. He's a German name. The Ising model, which essentially is a model for ferromagnetism, in which there is a competition between the coupling of spins, of neighboring spins, which tend to align against heat and temperature with a Boltzmann distribution, which tends to change this alignment. So this competition makes that the system can be non-magnetized at low temperatures and wholly magnetized at higher temperatures. So in the space reference frame, and here I have two colors. One is spin up, the other is spin down. And at low temperature, what we see is that nearly all of them are aligned. This is a good model for ferromagnetism before a temperature of about minus 70 degrees centigrade. A ferro iron band can become a magnet. And at high temperatures, there's disorder and there's no big magnetic regions. While at criticality, at a certain temperature, there are islands of that look like fractals and which show scale invariance. Again, this is at the space reference frame. But what happens in time, in the time frame. Well, the Ising model doesn't have time in its Hamiltonian, but we can work with it using perturbation, metropolis, Monte Carlo methods to perturb the system and see how it evolves in time. And there's some surprising things. At subcritical temperatures, what we see is sort of random fluctuations. Supercritical is also like that. At criticality, we also see that this scale invariant or self-similar fractal structure remains. Let me go ahead. At the critical points, many other things happen, like the behavior of variance suddenly changes and goes to infinity in principle, kurtosis, which is the asymmetry of the system. But more important for this talk is the power spectrum of the magnetism. If you essentially add the spins of all the system, of all the members of the Ising model, what you find is the total magnetism. And when one sees the fluctuation, the variance, the variation of this magnetism, what we find as a function of temperature is that at first it is white flat, which means essentially white noise. But once we go up towards the critical temperature, this is a log-log scale. One finds a power law. And this signifies or signals essentially scale invariance. So we find also scale invariance at the time regime, in the time regime. Also, the signal, the fluctuations follow a power law. And this was what attracted me to this field, because if one sees this fractality at the level of space, you can't say much about it. But listening to the signals, to the time signals, is easy to do in some cases, as I will show you in a moment. So when one calculates power laws, when essentially what I was telling you, this is at the critical stage. At subcritical stage, the magnetization oscillates around 0, essentially. It's subcritical, so there's no, the magnetization oscillates around 1 if you normalize it. And the power spectrum looks pretty much like white noise. At the critical stage, however, you see that the signals become more complex, going up and down. And interestingly, the log-log power spectrum follows precisely in a log-log space of power law. Okay. And the slope has different meanings, and I will talk about that a little later. So what is this behavior, and what am I trying to say? Well, in the case of randomness and chaos, this is the other way around. This is at higher temperatures, one finds randomness in time, in the fluctuations, in the variability of the signal, while at low temperatures, one finds excessive order. So there is a part of this signal which lies between this order and this chaos, which is the famous phrase of Kaufman, which I always thought was a metaphor, but it turns out not to be a metaphor and to be a real observation of these systems. So this is probably the most important slide. And this is, what about evolution and criticality? So the point is that organisms and their organs develop in a changing environment. So there are two, this is a simplification, of course, but there's two antagonistic requirements. One of them is robustness, which means phenotypes should be robust as they evolve. We don't want them to change too much. It has been chosen, it has been, evolution has been acting on them. But because of the environment changing, because of that, you also need adaptability. So you need somehow to look for an equilibrium between these two requirements, robustness and adaptability, okay? So Darwinian, the interesting point is that Darwinian selection leads to this criticality. Can we show that this is true in some simple examples or not? So what is the signal we all hear more easily from a human being, besides his talking? It's our heart rate, right? This was spontaneous. So, you know, we all know essentially what our heart rate frequency is. When you're in good shape, let's say 60 beats per minute, then in average, we have 1 beat per second. So in an electrocardiogram, we can measure, in this case, to simplify things, this is a form of the electrocardiogram. We can measure the distance between these peaks, the most evident peaks, which are called R, the RR intervals, okay? And this is something that until very recently was not taken into account by cardiologists. So let me show you, this I showed once to a cardiologist meeting, showing them this kind of graphs in which there's 3 individuals having what I'm showing here is essentially the frequency or the length of these intervals against measurement, against time, okay? So there is this kind of changes which are pretty important. Here's another individual who has a very regular pattern, and this kind of individual. Doctors didn't know really. I didn't show you, I showed them this, and I said, which is the normal heart? And many didn't know. Many thought perhaps it was this. It looks so regular, so, I mean, a pattern like a Swiss clock or something. This one is actually fibrillating. It's a tachycardia. It is going to the other extreme. So this one is very regular. This is too random. So the healthy heart is somehow in between this. This was discovered some 20, 30 years ago by medical Dr. Goldberger in Harvard. And this really took my attention because it turns out that this scale invariance of criticality means essentially that the signal, when we amplify and amplify and amplify, of course, this has a limit in this case, are statistically equal, identical. This is the meaning of scale invariance in these cases. And it turns out that normal hearts at rest have this kind of behavior, and in fact, they follow, healthy hearts follow this, follow this kind of power law. This is the case, for example, of people who are not healthy. Here we're talking about children in the streets. Here is very old people which have a very stiff slope, but also have an initial random movement. And this is a healthy individual, okay? This was sort of new, the fact that not only does the heart, as Kaufman conjectured, is somehow in the area between randomness and order, but you can actually measure it and take it as a way to analyze in a very simple way to find ways to see if your heart is behaving. Is it giving an early warning of some unhealthy behavior? So we have started a number of investigations using this as a signal, and I won't stop here very much, but younger people have a very, this again is the power spectrum of the heart rate. The slopes are very much near -1, which is a special kind of noise. And older people in a rather older area lose this scale invariance. But this has been shown already by many people, and we decided to take a simpler patient, which is this little worm called C. elegans, which happens to have a pump. It doesn't have a heart. It is a millimeter in length. It is transparent. So with a student in biology in this faculty, we studied this pump. This pump acts like a kind of heart in this worm because it pulls the fluid where there's bacteria, which is a nutrient, essential nutrient of these worms. And we decided, let's see what happens there, okay? And we could measure with an ultra-fast camera provided, in fact, by Arturo Machaca, who's here. And we could measure, and what am I showing you here? The area of this pump. So you can see, the important thing to see is that there's minima, very well-defined minima, which is the moment that the pump is closing up. And you also can see that there's variation, a more complex variation. So to our surprise, in fact, when we calculated the power law, we saw a perfect fit to this power law behavior. So what's the meaning of this? Are all self-organized systems, systems alive, scale invariant, and have this kind of power law or not? So of course, there's many other organs and the organism itself. What can we say about the signals that we can measure from this system? And the answer is we have been studying this for a long time. We have used this heart rate behavior in many different conditions, and we do find that it's a good signal of some pathology, okay? But there's many other systems which express many signals, and we don't know exactly how to measure this critical behavior there. And this is the main point I'm going to talk about now. And if you look at the literature, in the last few years, the idea of a brain criticality is more often cited than not. There's hundreds and hundreds now of papers. And this has some logic. There's billions and billions of neurons. And what we want to test or to find are the patterns of the collective behavior of the heart. And the idea behind brain criticality is that this scale invariance helps explain the emergence of these complex systems. It probably optimizes information processing. For example, how fast can the motor part of our brain connects with the visual or the olfactory, auditory parts of our brain. Okay, so this has been proposed. The problem is, how do we measure if this brain, in this case, is near this golden region which Kaufman defined? And it turns out that people have defined and found ways to define this criticality. And it has to do essentially with the behavior of avalanche in the systems. So in rats, we can excite the brain and see how this excitation goes down in an avalanche. And it turns out that these avalanches follow power laws. I won't get into the description of Ising and brain, but at criticality, Ising and the brain behave in a remarkably similar way that I will not explain exactly what it means. But we were not very happy with this, because if I want to know if a human's brain is actually in a critical state, it would be very invasive, very uncomfortable to have an electroshock there or something to find if it behaves in this way. Want to? Yes. So let me get into what we did. And this is now, instead of having, for example, the magnetization or a single average of a signal, we have a bunch of signals. This is an electroencephalogram. And what we did is that we found that the main idea in the case of the brain is to find a correlation between the signals. This is very much like collective nuclear models. You find correlations that create shapes and create patterns. So we defined a new model of Ising systems which are coupled vertically. And we tested an hypothesis. We proposed that if we find a correlation matrix between these different signals, the eigenvalues of the system would follow a power law. Okay? This is, we think, is a new way to define criticality for a many signal system. This is the paper we published in 2021, and I won't get too much into it, just tell you that this generalizes the idea of the power law. And what it means, in my opinion, this again, we show what is the behavior of this complete system under changing of temperature. They are coupled, you know, these coupled systems, each one has its own magnetization. So we couple them, and we did find that our hypothesis or conjecture is correct. That is, at the critical system, the eigenvalues from the highest to the lowest follow a power law. This is quite surprising. And in fact, this is what it means. And then I will go to show you some results in actual rains. We postulated then that if we calculate this correlation matrix, this matrix will be symmetric, of course, and we postulate that at the matrix level, the system is invariant if the eigenvalues follow exactly this pattern, okay? As I mentioned down there, in fact, this reduces to the one-dimensional case too. So we tested this with actual EEGs, electroencephalograms, and for our, we're happy to see that in fact, this occurs in systems, in people who are relaxing. We tried also to see if these eigenvalues move or not, or alter when we make them do an arithmetic task. It seems the arithmetic task is not so difficult. Maybe they were mathematicians, but we couldn't see much of a difference between them. And now I'll show you the results of this. Once we have a correlation matrix, we can calculate both its eigenvalues and its eigenfunctions. It's like a drum, where we excite the drum and we can find what are the normal modes. And what we find is precisely that kind of behavior. We apply it to the brain, to human brain. And this is mode 1, it's like an average. Mode 2 is back and front. Mode 3 is left and right. Mode 4 is something like central and peripheral. So this is interesting. We, starting from let me try to show you this in time, what happens in time. We see these modes in time. It's like this drum I mentioned. Now, this is one of the subjects. We analyze dozens and dozens of these subjects, and we find that they all follow this kind of pattern. And they, as you can see, well, this is a person relaxing, the other is doing calculations, but we see essentially the same modes in the brain. Are these physiologically interesting modes or not? This again, I won't show you this is the left-right behavior. Again, they are very similar. This is the front-back behavior. And this, in fact, happens for all of them. And this is quite surprising. We take 20, 25, 30 subjects and we find the same modes in all of them, no matter what their electroencephalogram says. Okay? So, can we distinguish between the whole pattern of waves, which is a very complex, turbulent thing, with the person who is doing mathematical calculations. And the answer is only if we take the small modes. The large modes are very fixed, are very robust. And it's only in the smaller ones. It's like if we would have special connections, roads in our brain, which are essentially fixed, no matter if you're sick, even if you have something like Parkinson, okay? But the smaller modes do show this, and we used machine learning showing, using all these modes, and found that we could distinguish 100% of the people who were doing calculations. So we are doing this in collaboration with different groups at UNAM and trying to see, in this case in monkeys, whether their learning process can change these patterns, okay? With Pablo Rodomin, whose 90th birthday is today, in fact, we're studying nociception, which means the study of pain. And we're also using this methodology to try, for example, if you have a person who cannot express itself, it's in a coma or in a vegetative way, can you distinguish a pattern which means pain? And these are experiments which we are carrying on today. Finally, I want to tell you that this does not have to restrict to the brain or to the heart, but we have applied these same ideas to the most famous graph there is now in the world, which is the temperature and the variation of the temperature. This is the one, it's called the hockey stick. And we decided, since we have learned that variability of signals really is more important than the amplitude. This is a change of 1.5 degrees. People laugh at that and don't understand that this is an enormous amount of energy. But we have divided this graph into decades. This starts in 1980, and this is the average temperature of the world. And they look very similar. This is the second one, in the second decade. But what I want to show you is that here we calculate the power laws of this, and we found two surprises. One, the Earth indeed behaves like a living system, like a self-organized system. It follows this temperature, which is like the palpitations of the Earth, follow our law. But as you advance in time, you start losing this critical behavior, and this is basically a current one, where we find that there is a loss of self-organization of the whole system. So I tried to localize Lovelock, the Gaia writer, but he was already 100 years old. I couldn't actually make contact with him, okay? So I'll finish by stressing that the use of symmetry can have different ways of being applied. We know all here have done this kind of use in elementary systems, in small systems like crystals or nuclei. And here, the important thing is there's a dominant scale, and we find fundamental symmetries that remain isolated. The systems remain isolated against other scales. And we find, of course, symmetries and conserved quantities. While in a complex systems like a pond, self-similarity and scale invariance provoke that there's many different scales in the system which cascade between one another. So criticality in this case means evolutionary equilibrium. Okay, this is a very interesting remark. The main dynamical symmetry of biological system is this scale invariance, which makes the system to be interconnected in a very particular way. So there's, I think I don't have much time left, but we conclude that these symmetry ideas can be applied to these organisms, and they can measure the health of these systems, which are complex and which have many scales. We believe that evolution has led the way for our living systems to be in this critical region, okay? And these examples include heart and brain signals, but as I try to emphasize, this can be applied to correlated systems of very different kinds. And I leave this summary for you to read while I finish up my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you much, Alejandro. We have time for 1 or 2 questions at most, so that we continue with our program. Alejandro.
Very well organized as well. Not critical, but the other way around. I wanted to know if you can get some information out of the power itself. In other words, you spoke about the power law that you find in these many systems, but you didn't say what was the power. And the question is because, see, we know that the power indicates a kind of phase transition that we're speaking about. Can you comment on this?
Yes, that's a very good question, and has to do with the slope, essentially, of the system. And I want to point out that, you know, this way of looking at this, I'm sorry about the speed I'm talking about this, but the matrix, the correlation matrix of the system, and this, as I said, may be applied, for example, to financial power, time series, has the 2 limits. If one has a system where there's no correlation at all between the different, for example, let's think about the electroencephalogram. If there's no correlation, you will have zeros all over the place, except for the diagonal where you have ones. So the hypothesis is that all the eigenvalues will be flat, like it is the case in white noise. So it has that limit. In the other limit, suppose that all these signals are perfectly coordinated, perfectly correlated. Then you have ones all over the matrix. When you diagonalize a matrix with only ones, you have a single eigenvalue. So this is the limit of a slope of 90 degrees, where it is a perfect periodic pattern. So this somehow in the middle between beta, which is the power, the slope, being -1 to -2, is essentially the place where you find criticality. Alejandro.
Oh, Alejandro, I wondered, you showed all these pictures of how the brain functions. Can you use these type of methods for an early determination of, for example, people with that?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I don't understand how neurologists can look at 20 or 40 or 50 signals and say something about it, unless there's a flat part where you say something is dead there or something. But how can they do this? Number one, you can convert it, as I did, and I didn't explain how, to this colored figures. What you see is turbulent flux there. But when you do this to find this dynamical modes, which we use PCA, I didn't mention that, but that's principal component analysis, you can in fact find in those the alterations we're looking for. So that's the idea with these groups of neurologists, to use these modes in a way that can take us to the particular problem that a person may have. Okay, thank you.
Well, we thank again Alejandro Frank for this fascinating talk. And the next talk will be given by Zoom connection. While the technical issues are arranged, I want to say a few words about Professor Bernd Surrow, a professor of physics at Temple University. Since year 2022, he's the Senior Associate Dean for Research and Operation of the College of Science and Engineering and Director of the Center for Online and Digital Learning. His research is focused on investigating the structure of the proton and its dynamics. Currently, he's the co-spokesperson to lead a new proposal for a future electron-ion collider facility to do hadronic physics. The title of his talk, and he could not deliver personally, is Status and Perspectives of the US-based Electron-Ion Collider Project, EIC. Since we have maybe a couple of minutes, I want to make an announcement, and it is during the coffee break, we will take the symposium photograph. It will be taken here inside the room, and we'll receive instructions later. And also those who didn't have time to complete their registration, the time
Yes,
will
can you
be
hear me? This is Bernd, can you hear me?
at coffee break.
Yeah, it's perfect. Okay, very good. So I'm ready when you are. I can share my screen and then I'm ready to go. Let me know. You want me to start?
Can you hear me? No. If you could inform him that he has 40 minutes. He's not listening to me.
Hello, do you want me to start?
How do we tell him not yet or yes yet?
Yes, you can start, please. Okay, very good. Okay, so I will start. So first of all, thank you so much for the opportunity, the invitation to give this presentation, this plenary talk. I wished I could be there in person with you today. I have taken part in this conference series, the Latin American Symposium on Nuclear Physics and Applications for many, many years. I was in Peru. I think that was the first meeting that I attended in Chile, in Ecuador, in Costa Rica, and I was looking forward to come now to Mexico. Anyhow, this just did not work out. But I'm really grateful that I'm given the opportunity to talk to you about an exciting project, a US-based particle collider facility in the United States, the Electron-Ion Collider. So I will talk to you about the detector and the collaboration. So let me first give you a little bit of an overview. What you see here on the right-hand side is a bird's eye view of part of the existing facility at Brookhaven National Laboratory, the relativistic heavy ion collider, the injector system in the actual facility, and the new additions for the Electron-Ion collider. So I will talk to you today about this. So the first thing I want to do is to give you an overview of the actual project development, what it took to come to this point where we are. Walk you through some selected EIC physics pillars, show you the detector layout, make a couple of remarks about the EPIC collaboration, and I will really use this opportunity speaking to you to hopefully gain some interest in the Latin American community to join this effort. And I will finish with a brief summary and next steps. So the Electron-Ion collider is the study of the structure and dynamics of matter at high luminosity, high energy, with polarized beams, with a wide range of nuclei. So colliding polarized electrons or polarized proton beams, or an electron beam with a heavy nuclei, from a very light nuclei to very heavy nuclei. This is in the plans for many, many years. I myself working on this over the last 20 years, basically. The last 10 years were really instrumental to formalize this and become really a DOE and official project within the context of the federal funding agencies in the United States. What you see here is the luminosity in units of centimeters squared to the power of -2 and seconds as a function of the center of mass energy colliding high energy polarized beams, either electron or proton, as I said, or electron and nuclei. And on the right axis, you see here integrated luminosity in units of inverse femtobarn per year. And there's clearly a progression in topics for this project, focusing initially on the behavior of partons, meaning quarks and gluons inside of a nuclei, focusing on the behavior of quarks and gluons, particularly gluons, in a very high partonic density environment. This is a feature in QCD that the underlying force particles, that gluons can interact among them, which you all know photons do not do that, and potentially observe what is referred to as saturation phenomena. We also want to study the spin and flavor structure, namely the quark flavor structure in nucleons and nuclei. And last but not least, and this is really a new element in the Jefferson Lab program in the United States is really stepping into this now already, namely the imaging of both the transverse momentum and spatial distribution of partons inside the proton. So what is required? What is required is a facility which is operating at very high luminosity, flexible center of mass energy, having access to polarized beams, as I mentioned before, electrons and proton beams, or light ion and heavy nuclei. A wide range of nuclear beams from deuterium to lead and nuclei, particularly focusing on the phenomenon of high gluon densities. On the detector side, on a collider environment, what is required is a wide acceptance detector system, both tracking, calorimetry on the one hand, but also dedicated particle identification over the entire hemisphere. So I will talk in more detail about this. In addition to the central requirements of a detector system, we also need instrumentation for tagging protons from elastic reaction and neutrons from nuclear breakup on the one hand, and in the opposite hemisphere to tag electrons scattered under extremely small angles referred to as the low Q-square tagger, and last but not least, provide even a means to measure the luminosity. What you see here is now more from a theoretical standpoint that the Electron-Ion collider bridges the gap between the region from non-perturbative to perturbative QCD. You see here the range in Q square from well below 1 GeV square up to 1,000 GeV square, entirely determined by the available center of mass energy, in comparison to the former Hermes ongoing Combus JLab 6 GeV program and the ongoing JLab 12 GeV program, and also in comparison to the world's only EP collider so far, which operated until 2007, the Hera collider. So let me contrast to you now and show you in the landscape of luminosity and center of mass energy where the electron-ion collider is operating. It is clearly above in luminosity, about 2 orders of magnitude above what we were used to with the Hera collider, somewhat smaller in center of mass energy, comparable in luminosity to a potential future project at CERN, colliding very high energetic electron beams and very high energetic proton beams, but obviously using proton beams from the LHC, which would operate at much higher center of mass energy. And what I show you here on the right-hand side is the typical landscape in kinematic variables, Q square, the -4 momentum transfer as a function of Bjork and X, which you can view as the parton momentum fraction for EA experiments, in contrast to former experiments, which were to a large extent focusing on a higher X region because they were dominantly carried out in fixed target mode, compared to a collider mode, where allowing you to reach larger center of mass energy and therefore probing smaller fraction of partons relative to their proton momentum. And on the bottom right, you see here Q square as a function of X here, but now emphasizing the polarized aspect, polarized EP here, also in comparison to prior polarized fixed target experiments. So let me walk you through now some critical steps which were needed to really come to this point. So there was a series of workshops carried out more than 10 years ago by the Institute of Nuclear Theory in Seattle. We wrote all of this up into a white paper. And this was part to a long-range plan. This is an extremely important exercise in the United States, a community effort driven and requested by the Department of Energy and the National Science Foundation to really document what does our community want to do. In the 2015 long-range plan, and I show you here a slide from our former Associate Director for the Office of Nuclear Physics, that the number 3 recommendation is to construct a high-energy luminosity polarized electron-ion collider. That formulation and the high-level recommendation led then the Department of Energy to request a high-level science review by the National Academy of Science. That was carried out, and the findings from the review committee by the National Academy of Science was released in summer 2018. And I quote here Gordon Bain in a webinar: "The committee finds that the science that can be addressed by an EIC is compelling, fundamental, and timely." I will make sure that you have the PDF file to this presentation available, and you can actually download the PDF file to this assessment report. What struck me and what really deeply impressed me is the high level, the physics case, and the way the review committee was actually summarized, the main pillars of the EIC program. So this led then to two things. Number one, the site selection and the award of really the start of a official Department of Energy project. So number one, in 2019, the U.S. Department of Energy announced the selection of Brookhaven National Laboratory as the site for a planned major new nuclear physics research facility, the Electron-Ion Collider. The other proposal that was submitted by Jefferson Laboratory, both laboratories are jointly focusing now on realizing this facility, although the facility technically will be realized only obviously in one lab. The critical decision 0 was then approved, already awarded in December 19, and the next critical step, so-called CD1, the approval of alternative selection in the cost range, was awarded in June 2021. So let me now give you a little bit of an overview of the high-level overview of the actual accelerator. The Electron-Ion Collider realization at Brookhaven National Laboratory builds upon the existing resources at the RIG facility, particularly the injection system. You see here the source, the polarized source, the booster at the AGS, where beams are injected at 25 GeV and then ramped to either 100 GeV or to even 250 GeV in 2 counter-rotating rings, the so-called blue and yellow beam. This is what we currently have so far. Now what will happen is An electron injector system will be built and an electron ring will be installed inside of the same tunnel to allow the collision of electron beams and proton beams or electron beams and heavy ion beams at two interaction regions. There's so far approval for only one project detector, the formation of the EPIC collaboration. I'm part of this entire effort here at the so-called 6 o'clock region of the RIC Collider facility. And there's also foreseen a second interaction region, but this is not part yet of the core funding. So I summarize here the main performance parameters of this facility. So it has a variable center of mass energy range from 20 to 140 GeV, high luminosity, highly polarized beams, and a large ion species from hydrogen, from proton up to uranium, and up to two interaction regions. But as I said before, so far there's only funding available or foreseen as part of the official EIC project for one experiment. So now, after we received all of this, we formed within the Electron-Ion Collider user group a community effort to really document in detail the physics case and the detector requirements. There were about 400 authors involved in this, spread over 150 institutions. It's quite an extensive document, over 900 pages. There's a link here to all of these volumes, the executive summary, physics, and the detector. And we actually published this in Nuclear Physics A. Let me give you here a little bit of a flavor of the actual schedule where we are with that. So the CD0 was awarded in December 2019, so the beginning of the official start of a DOE project. CD1 was awarded in June 2021, and we just received CD3A, which refers to the start and the purchasing of construction funds, namely for long lead items. And we're now working on this, the last part of CD3 to be scheduled in October by the end of this year, and CD2 early next year. The blue line, what you see here is the conclusion of the RIC operation. We are operating currently the RIC facility with polarized proton beams at Brookhaven. This is the last polarized PP run this year, and there's one more relativistic heavy ion run scheduled for next year. And this is then the conclusion after 25 years of the RIC Collider facility, before we then switch into a construction phase, both for the detector and the accelerator, and in about approximately 10 years from now, begin the actual science program for the Electron-Ion Collider. So let me walk you through some highlights now of the physics program. Let me first begin with the spin program to really deepen our understanding of the proton spin structure. So the proton consists of quarks and gluons. So you receive contributions to the proton spin from both the gluon spin, quark spin, and potentially their orbital motion. So what I show you here is now projected performance at a variety of center of mass energy in comparison to current fixed target experiment of the polarized structure function G1 as a function of Q squared for various values in X, the partonic momentum fraction relative to the proton. And you see here there's a vast increase, number one, in level arm in Q square, and the logarithmic scaling violation directly leads into the sensitivity to gluons, but also a dramatic extensions due to the larger center of mass energy towards smaller X value, as small as a few times 10 to minus 5. And what I show you here is now the extracted sum of quarks and gluon distribution, highlighting the integral in the emphasizing the low X region and the difference of a half, namely the proton spin, to the contribution from quarks and gluon, highlighting the more higher X region, and how the polarized EIC program allows to constrain more and more the various contributions of partons, quarks, and gluons to the proton spin. So what I show you here in a somewhat different view is the integral emphasizing quarks first, to the left emphasizing gluons first, and then emphasizing the potential contribution after subtracting contributions from quarks and gluons to the orbital motion. So let me, for the sake of time, emphasizing only the gluon spin contribution here in the middle. These various shades indicate our understanding, or the progression of our understanding so far. Our light blue indicates the current understanding stemming from measurements in polarized proton-proton collisions that I have been spearheading and working on for the last 20 years, particularly gluon spin and W boson measurements concerning the behavior of quarks and underquarks, light flavor underquarks particularly. So you see here we have made great strides over the years, but the electron-ion collider will really nail this effort, particular towards smaller x values. So what is plotted here is the integral from a lower bound x min to 1. So really showing the total gluon spin contribution as a function of x min, and that's why this is saturating here towards here, approximate just below 0.4. And keep in mind, the proton spin itself is just 0.5 here. So now another incredibly important element, and really a new element, is to really account for imaging of partons inside of the proton, namely the impact parameter dependence is the spatial imaging and the transverse momentum dependence. And this goes after a class of novel distribution functions, so-called transverse momentum distribution function, where we not only account for at a certain scale q square at the momentum fraction, but also the transverse momentum. So those are referred to as transverse momentum distribution. Besides so-called impact parameter distribution, we will also not only account for their momentum fraction, but where they really are inside of the proton. So I show you here some extraction, some simulation work, for example, from gluon distribution indicating their dominance at the center of the proton and their fall off and how they're falling off. This is what we really want to study here. And similarly for the respective transverse momentum distribution functions. Last but not least, I want to make a few remarks about the low X physics. Low X physics refer to where partons, meaning quarks or gluons, have an extremely small momentum fraction relative to the proton momentum. And a proton, a picture of the proton, so if you ask, if you're being asked by a high school student, what is the structure of the proton? How does a proton really look like? And I think a good answer is it is a very, very dense system of many, many gluons and quark underquark pairs, but they all have an extremely small momentum fraction. And the question is, does this phenomena, this high density phenomena at one point saturate? And we have not in our community conclusively seen such a saturation behavior. So what we want to study here is the resolution, what is shown here, q square as a function of the parton density, quantifying here as 1 over x. So this refers to a very high partonic density system. So 1 over x, 1 over an extremely small number of the momentum fraction of a parton. This is a less dense system to the left-hand side here. And we want to study this from a non-perturbative to a perturbative regime here, not only in p scattering. Hera operated at a much larger center of mass energy, but the key element is to do this now with colliding heavy nuclei to an electron beam. And what I show you here is now projected performances for electron gold scattering, namely the inclusive cross-section, a so-called reduced cross-section, which is a combination of the so-called F2 structure function, which is a textbook example to account for the behavior and inclusive scattering of partons inside of the proton. And also you see the combination of the so-called longitudinal structure function, which is not separated out here when plotting the reduced cross-section. As a function of q square and a vast increase in kinematic reach, both in small x values and in q square. What I show you here now is the longitudinal structure function. The new longitudinal structure function has the appealing element that it's directly connected to the gluon distribution function. As shown here as a function of x here for a variety of Q-square values. But you extract the longitudinal structure function, you have to operate your collider facility at a variable center of mass energy. And that's why that was a key requirement to do so for the EIC program. That has been started at HERA, and it's a challenging measurement. What I show you here is now the respective charm cross-section is a function of Q squared to the left, and also the longitudinal structure function for charm reduction on the right-hand side. So again, emphasizing the vast increase in kinematic reach towards a larger range in Q square and smaller, reaching smaller values in X. Last but not least, what I want to share with you here is now the ratio, the modification, that ratio, namely the ratio of the gluon distribution in lead compared to proton. So how is a gluon being modified while being in a hadronic environment? And you see this here at very small values in Q square and larger values in Q square. And the shaded and orange band show the impact the electron-ion collider have. Orange is only for inclusive measurements. The hatched bluish band, hatched area includes not only inclusive but also charm measurements over our current understanding. And you see this uncertainty band blows up towards smaller values in X because we currently don't have even any measurements there. So let me now come to the actual detector requirement. What is required to perform such a program? And let me walk you through an increased level of complexity. So the first step is perform inclusive measurements. What does that mean? So you're colliding an electron in a proton beam and you scatter the electron from the proton breaks up and you only measure the scattered electron here. Or you measure only the hadronic final state or a combination of both to define the underlying kinematics, but you're not identifying the nature of these various hadrons emerging from this violent interaction here. And this is a key element for initial unpolarized, but also polarized structure function measurement, what I showed you before, F2, FL, and G1. And also to define the underlying kinematics, namely, what is the momentum fraction of a part on X, Q square, and so on. The next level of sophistication is so-called semi-inclusive deep inelastic scattering, where we also identify the nature of the hadrons. So that requires then dedicated particle identification system. So where we identify that you have, for example, a pion, a kaon, and so on, and even heavy flavors charm. And last but not least, so-called exclusive measurements, deeply virtual content scattering, where the proton basically stays intact here and you have only a photon in the final state. So what is now required, the general requirements here? So you need a wide acceptance system close to a 4-pi coverage of your detector system. Speaking in relativistic quantities, is a pseudo-rapidity, which is a synonym essentially for the polar angle of approximate pseudo-rapidity in absolute values less than 3.5 for calorimetry and tracking, low dead material. So that requires the designing of detector system which have very, very low dead material by nature, particularly in the backward direction where particles, both the scattered electron and hadronic final state particles are very low energetic, good momentum resolution and electron identification. Keep in mind, a key element in a deep elastic scattering experiment is to filter out the electron over the hadronic final state. So we need to have excellent electron identification capabilities. Particle identification, both from the backward barrel, the central region into the forward direction with varying degrees and requirements going from low to medium to high energies. And that changes the requirements and the type of particle identification. High spatial vertex resolution, and last but not least, low angle taggers, both in the outgoing scattered proton direction and in the backward direction where electrons are scattered under very small angles, and various auxiliary systems to make luminosity and local polarimetry measurements. So how did we come now to this? How did we realize that? So both Brookhaven and Jefferson Laboratory are pleased to announce the call for collaboration proposal. This is already a couple of years ago. DIC will have the capability to host 2 interaction regions, each with a corresponding detector. It is expected that each of these detectors would be presented by a collaboration. So at the moment, we're focusing only on one. There's only funding officially for one funded experiment by the Department of Energy. But what I want to highlight here, this was an entire community effort. So there were 3 proposals submitted, Athena or an ECHE. I was leading the Athena proposal. And at the end of the day, we were asked to join forces, Athena and ECHE. That took some time, and we formed a new collaboration, the so-called EPIC collaboration. Core to almost to a large extent focused on the other interaction region, and there's a dedicated team group focusing on this, but the funding path is not so clear so far. So let me walk you now through the main design elements in the last 10 minutes or so for the EPIC experiment. This looks, what I show you here is a very complex view of the interaction region. This is a distorted view. Keep this in mind. You see here 20, 40, this is in meters, compared to here from 0.5 to 1, also in meters. So this is a very distorted view here to really show you the interaction region. The electrons are coming from the right, the hadrons are coming from the left. There's a crossing angle. There's a dedicated system to measure electrons in a very backward direction for so-called low Q-square taggers in the luminosity measurement. And there's a spectrometer system in the outgoing proton direction to measure protons scattered under extremely small angle besides the actual central detector system. Let me first walk you through the very forwarded detector system for the scattered proton under very small angles. This falls actually into 4 subsystems. A system focusing on silicon tracker and a pre-shower detector, then a Roman pot system, a zero-degree calorimeter, and a separate detector system, the so-called off-momentum detector. So it provides acceptance for extremely small angles. You see here the acceptance in the polar angle in units of milliradians. In the opposite hemisphere, so where electrons are scattered under very small angles, there are various taggers foreseen, low Q-square taggers foreseen. It's more like a photo production tagger because you see here the actual distribution from a Pythia simulation in yellow. This is 10 to minus 6, 10 to minus 4, 10 to minus 3. So this is extremely small Q-square. This is not Q-square values between 0.1 and 1 in GeV square. This is more like a photo production tagger, in fact. And you see here the layout in spirit, very similar how it was done for the Hera luminosity upgrade using the Bethe-Heitler process from Bremsstrahlung photons. You have photons in a converter here into E plus and minus pair, a dipole magnet, and you measure the decay positron and electron, and this provides the means for luminosity measurement. So let me now walk you through the actual central detector system. Central detector system has all 3 principal components in a typical LIDAR experiment, namely a tracking system, particle identification system, and calorimetry. The solenoidal magnetic field is 1.7 Tesla. The core central tracking system consists of silicon MAPS detectors surrounded by various layers in the barrel region and also disks in the backward in the forward direction of micropattern gas detectors. My group is actually heavily involved in the backward region of micropattern gas detectors. The particle identification system consists of various types of dedicated system with increasing demands in energy. So from more lower energy in the backward direction to higher energy in the barrel region and towards higher energies in the forward direction, consisting of ring imaging Cherenkov detectors or the Dirk detectors, which has been featured in the Babar experiment at SLAC. And a lot of elements will be still actually reused from the Babar experiment. Last but not least, calorimetry, so energy measurement devices. We have electromagnetic calorimetry and hadronic calorimetry in all hemispheres. So in the backwards direction, there's a very high resolution lead tungstate electromagnetic calorimeter system, because you require here superb energy resolution to define the precision of the kinematic variables, particularly X, through a dedicated angle, energy and polar angle measurement extremely well. In the barrel region, you have a dedicated combination of electromagnetic hadronic calorimetry and also in the forward direction. So let me walk you through now the various tracking systems. First, the MAPS tracker. Those feature very small pixels. They have been reused, a similar technology as at the ALICE experiment at CERN. It features various layers, but also in a disk arrangement, both in the backward direction, in the forward direction. This is complemented by a dedicated micropattern gas detector at larger area, both in the backward region, 2 micropattern gas detectors in the backward region, but also in the forward direction, complemented with dedicated time-of-flight systems. Here I show you the performance parameters. You can review this for yourself, but it features very, very low dead material for the silicon detector systems in the barrel region. Similarly, for the gaseous tracted micropattern gas detectors, and here's some typical performance plots. Let me walk you now through towards the end for the calorimetry system. So as I said, there is a hadronic and electromagnetic calorimeter system in all 3 hemispheres, backward, barrel, and forward, of different types. Again, I mentioned a couple of examples here. In the backward direction, there's a high resolution lead tungstate calorimeter system in the backward direction. There's a reuse of the S-Phoenix hadronic calorimeter, and then there's a very novel design of the backward, the barrel electromagnetic calorimeter system under the leadership of the Argonne National Laboratory team. In the combination of a lead tungstate scintillating fiber electromagnetic hadronic calorimeter in the forward direction. Here's some performance plots, which I leave for your review once you actually have the slides. Last but not least, the particle identification system. Let me also start here again in the backward direction. It is featuring a ring imaging Cherenkov detector. In the barrel region, it is using fused silicon bars, the so-called high-performance Dirk system, the quartz bar. The radiators are bars from the former Babar experiment. And last but not least, the rich detector system in the forward direction. Let me skip this here for the rich detector particle identification performance, except let me make one brief remark, which I mentioned now a couple of times. The increasing demand for particle identification towards higher energy from the backward to the barrel to the forward direction. Let me skip also the DRQ system, and let me actually spend a little bit more time now towards the end on the community aspect here. And I have just updated this world chart of participating institutions. So you see participating countries are highlighted in various colors, and the actual numbers, the bold numbers, indicate the number of institutions from a particular country. So for example, Canada, there are 2, United States, there's 67, the United Kingdom, there are 9, France, there are 2, and so on. And then you see here the subdivision by various countries for various institutions. North America, the 45%, Asia 37%, Europe 27%, Africa 4%. So we have here, there are 4 institutions in Morocco and 1 institution in Senegal. There's also 1 institution in Egypt. What we would like to see here, and that's why I want to spend a moment here, as I mentioned to you in the beginning, I've joined this Latin American Symposium in Nuclear Physics and Applications for a couple of times. I went to Peru, to Chile, to Ecuador, to Costa Rica. I'm unfortunately not being able in person to come to Mexico, but at least I'm speaking to you. I would be delighted if you are interested in joining our effort. In the title slide, there's my email address. Please contact me. I'm part of the leadership team of the EPIC collaboration. We are really looking for talented young people, graduate students, postdocs, who are assisting and helping us in simulation work, eventually in detector assembly. We need help on all fronts for all subsystems. Don't think, let me actually spend a moment to go back to an overview of the entire detector system. Don't think that all obligations for all of these subsystems are defined and people are stepping on their toes. This is by far not the case, okay? So there's lots of room for new institutions, for hardworking young people to join us. So please contact me if you're interested. This shows you the fraction of non-US institutions in the EPIC collaboration. It's a very international effort, 62%. So you see here in this bubble chart, the United States institution and the various other institutions. So let me summarize. Over the last two decades, the nuclear physics community has developed a scientific and technical case for the electron-ion collider to really push the frontiers of human understanding of fundamental structure and dynamics of matter. We profit enormously from a very diverse set of experience among experimentalists, even though there's an experimental driven talk, but I also want to highlight here the role of theorists. And even some of your colleagues in Latin American countries might be interested in that. I have one group in Argentina, Daniel de Floren and Rodolfo Sasso, whom I'm working for many, many years on these efforts. We went through a very successful merging. It was not easy at times of two proposal efforts to join ECHE and Athena to form the EPIC collaboration. And there's a very exciting time ahead of us to explore the structure and dynamics of matter in a collider experiment. This doesn't happen in your lifetime very often. And so again, if you're interested, let's talk. Even at a very informal basis, please contact me. We would be delighted to hear from you. Thank you. Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I'm María Brandan. Thank you, the moderator of your session. Thank you very much for it. It delivered really well. So we are happy that your participation could be arranged.
Yeah, I'm really grateful that you made this arrangement. Thank you so much.
The participants will have access to your coordinates if they need to contact you. Is there anyone who wants to make a comment or send a question right now to Bernd? As I said, I offer the possibility for later if you want to consider the kind invitation to join his project. Thank you much, Bernd, and we continue with the
Enjoy the conference. Thank you for your comment.
tiene contraseña o algo? ¿La compu?
No, no tiene ninguna contraseña.
La voy a dejar aquí por si acaso.